The relevant remarks from the U.S. side gravely distort the facts. From 27 to the 29th of August local time, Li Chenggang, China's trade representative and vice minister, traveled to the United States to engage in exchanges with the U.S. side on implementing the consensus reached during the telephone conversation between the leaders of China and the U.S. Discussions centered on China-U.S. economic and trade relations and the implementation of the consensus from the China-U.S. economic and trade talks. China also raised representations with the U.S. regarding the restrictions imposed under the Section 301 investigation into China's shipbuilding and other industries. China has consistently taken the initiative to engage in consultations with the U.S. regarding the Section 301 investigation restrictions, maintaining a constructive stance and proposing relevant cooperative measures. However, the U.S. has adopted a negative attitude and insisted on implementing the restrictions. Consequently, China has been compelled to adopt countermeasures, including the imposition of special port fees on U.S. vessels in accordance with laws and regulations. The U.S. Section 301 investigation and restrictions on China's shipbuilding and other industries represent typical unilateralism and protectionism, severely damaging the interests of China's relevant industries while also fueling inflation within the United States and undermining the competitiveness of U.S. ports and employment. I must particularly emphasize that the implementation of these U.S. measures has indeed disrupted global supply chain stability and caused chaos in the international shipping industry. China's countermeasures constitute a passive defensive response, representing a necessary step to safeguard fair competition within the international shipping and shipbuilding markets. China hopes the U.S. will recognize the error of its ways, engage with China in a spirit of mutual accommodation, and return to the correct path of dialogue and consultation. China has noted the relevant developments. China firmly opposes the Dutch authorities' broad interpretation of the concept of national security and their direct intervention in corporate internal affairs through administrative measures. Such actions not only violate the spirit of contractual agreements and market principles, but will also severely damage the Dutch business environment, harming both parties. The Dutch move serves as a clear example of how the U.S., piercing the corporate veil rule, undermines the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises. The U.S. piercing the corporate veil rule is the instigator of harm against Chinese companies. China's recent introduction of rare earth export control measures constitutes a legitimate practice in accordance with laws and regulations to refine its export control system. The objective is to prevent the illicit diversion of rare earths towards inappropriate uses such as weapons of mass destruction, thereby better safeguarding China's national security and global common security. The American interpretation grossly misrepresents and exaggerates China's measures, deliberately provoking unnecessary misunderstanding and alarm. In reality, America's extraterritorial jurisdiction measures have a long history, having been implemented decades ago. The American narrative projects its own practices onto others, which precisely demonstrates how the United States itself is continually broadening the scope of national security. The security and stability of global supply chains require the joint efforts of all nations, including the United States, to safeguard.